Have you ever wondered why the holidays bring out your worst feelings, the resentment, the withdrawal, and at times even irritation? Why does being around family suddenly make your old defensive patterns flare up? The aloofness, the shutdown, or the people pleasing and forced charm? Why is it that when you are getting ready, or the moment when you actually walk into a holiday gathering, the psychological stability that you've built up all year suddenly feels precarious? Have you ever wondered, is holiday stress really about too much socializing? Or is it about being pushed out of your carefully maintained inner refuge? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. These are a few of the questions we're going to tackle in this special holiday episode. The holidays tend to stir up what we call in my field a state of narcissistic vulnerability, a moment when your internal world feels fragile, exposed, or easily disrupted. It's the part of the personality that asks, and I quote, "Do I matter?" Or "How much do I matter? Will I be seen? Will I be heard? Or will I even be noticed?" The holidays intensify all of these questions and then add several more. Returning home, stepping back into old family dynamics, or simply navigating a higher volume of social interactions can stir up a wide range of feelings. Suddenly, you're not just attending a family dinner or a work gathering, you're being pushed outside your familiar psychological terrain, beyond the routines and internal structure that helps keeps you stable and comfortable. When you are forced, and I quote the word forced, I'll go into this in more detail momentarily, but when you're forced to step out of your comfort zone because of family and social obligations, as you can imagine, the pressure rises, the pressure to perform, to be heard, to hold everything together, to be seen in a certain way, or to avoid shame or feeling criticized. But what I want to emphasize is something more subtle and more psychologically accurate. Your old defensive patterns are being challenged. Why and how, and this is what I'm encouraging you to consider, do the very moments designed to bring people together also, and I quote again, expose the most fragile parts of your inner world? And I'll come back to that word expose in a moment. I'm focusing on exposure because the very strategies you've relied on to steady yourself, the internal places you retreat to when you feel overwhelmed, they become much harder to access. This is where things can feel especially destabilizing. Narcissistic defenses aren't only about grandiosity or entitlement, they're also about preserving a sense of safety inside oneself. For many people with narcissistic characteristics, having a protected internal world, a familiar psychic space where you can withdraw from emotional demands, is essential. It's the place where you regulate, where you restore your equilibrium, where you escape the feelings of being, again, I quote, exposed. During the holidays, that safe internal territory becomes harder to maintain. And I quote, psychic retreat, and don't worry, I'll come back and I'll describe what I mean by this concept in a moment. But the psychic retreat, the withdrawal into a private inner world to avoid external reality, gets interrupted by the sheer reality of proximity, family expectations, relational demands, work obligations, and therefore what we see is emotional intensity. This is why people with narcissistic traits can feel especially reactive during this season. It's not that they're simply being self-centered or difficult, typical labels that you may hear if you're looking into the holidays and narcissism. But what I'm suggesting is that their defensive structure, their psychic retreat, their place of safety is being intruded upon. The outside world begins pressing in, and the usual distance that you rely on starts to collapse. When that protective inner space becomes harder to access, it becomes much more difficult to hide inside the familiar refuge that typically keeps painful feelings at bay. In other words, narcissistic behavior is not just exhibitionistic or controlling. It is often a form of defensive withdrawal, a way to protect a fragile inner self that fears being seen, misunderstood, or criticized. At some point, we'll explore these painful emotions more fully, but I'll tell you now, they often also include shame and a sense of irrelevance and a profound feeling of aloneness. And yes, aloneness even when with others at these holiday gatherings. When the holidays disrupt the retreat, the person can feel exposed. And it's this exposure, not malice or selfishness, again, which you typically hear, but it's this exposure that drives much of the tension. Now, on the surface, it's not uncommon. You may see selfishness, a lack of empathy. It's not to say that these things are not true, but what I'm getting at here is what drives that type of behavior.